All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to flip a really common idea completely on its head. You know how we often think about a huge population as, well, a problem? What if that's totally wrong? What if a country's people aren't a drain on resources at all, but actually its single greatest asset? What if people are the ultimate investment?
I mean, you've heard the arguments a million times, right? A big population means more strain on food, on schools, on hospitals. But what if that's only seeing one side of the coin? What if that's only half the story? What if all those people are actually a huge, hidden strength just waiting to be unlocked?
So to really get our heads around this, we're going to walk through 5 key ideas. First, we'll look at that big question, are people a burden or an asset? Then, we'll dig into the formula for turning people into a powerful resource. We'll see how this works in real life with a story about 2 friends, then zoom out to see how it affects whole countries. And we'll wrap up with an amazing story about how one single investment changed a whole village.
Okay, let's jump right in with that first big shift in thinking. Is a population a burden, something that just drains the economy, or is it an asset that actually builds it?
So, on the one hand, you've got the negative view, right? The idea that more people just means more mouths to feed, a liability that strains everything. But then, there's this other much more powerful idea, that people are an asset. They're not just taking things from the economy, they're the ones who create everything in it. They're the innovators, the workers, the very source of the skills that build a nation's wealth.
Okay, so if people are an asset, how do you actually, make that happen? How do you turn a population from just a number into a truly powerful force? Well, the answer is something called the human capital formula, and this is really the core of our whole explainer today.
So what is human capital? It's a pretty key term. And look, it's not just about having a ton of people. Not at all. It's about the skills, the knowledge, and even the health that all those people have, all rolled together. It really comes down to the quality of your workforce, not just the quantity.
And you should think about it exactly like any other kind of investment. Seriously. Step 1 is the investment itself. You put in things like education, job training, and good medical care. Step 2, that investment creates what's called human capital formation. Basically, you're building up a skilled, knowledgeable, healthy workforce. And step 3, you get these incredible returns, higher productivity, which leads to higher incomes for individuals and for the country as a whole.
And this is what makes human capital so special, so much more important than other resources. Think about it. A piece of land or a big factory, they can't do anything by themselves. They're just stuff. They need skilled, healthy people to make them useful. Human capital is the secret sauce, the active ingredient that unlocks the potential in everything else.
Okay, I know this can all sound a little abstract, so let's make it real. Let's look at a story of 2 friends, Sakal and Vilas. Their stories really show how investment, or the lack of it, can completely change a person's life.
So first up, we have Sakal. Now, his parents made a really important choice. They decided to invest in his education. And it wasn't easy, His father even took out a loan so Sakal could learn about computers. But, wow, look at the payoff. Because they invested in his skills and his health, Sakal didn't just end up with some random job. He built a real career. He got a good job at a firm, started designing new software, and even got a promotion. He became someone who adds value.
Now, in that very same village was his friend Vilas. And his story, well, it's heartbreakingly different. His dad passed away when he was just a little kid. There was no money for school. He suffered from arthritis but couldn't afford to see a doctor. He was just stuck. With no investment in his health or education, he had no choice but to do the same work his mother did, selling fish for a very small income. All that potential he had was just lost.
When you put their stories side by side, the difference is just stark. It's a simple and kind of brutal truth. Sakal got education, training, and was healthy. Vilas got none of that. So one becomes a skilled programmer with high productivity and a good income. The other stays an unskilled fisherman with low productivity and a meager income. They came from the same village but ended up in 2 completely different worlds, and it all came down to that initial investment.
All right, so we've seen how this plays out for 2 individuals. Now let's zoom the camera out, because this same exact logic applies to whole families and even to entire countries. It creates these powerful cycles that can either lift people up or trap them for generations.
Economists have a name for this. They call them virtuous cycles and vicious cycles. So in a virtuous cycle, you have educated parents. They know how important health and school are, right? So they make sure their own kids get a good start. And that creates this positive feedback loop where success builds on success generation after generation. But the flip side is the vicious cycle. Disadvantaged parents, who maybe didn't have those opportunities themselves, can get stuck. They might not have the resources or knowledge to break the pattern, and their kids end up in a similar situation. It's a cycle of poverty that is incredibly tough to escape.
And if you want a real-world example of this on a massive scale, just look at Japan. I mean, here's a country with very few natural resources, no oil, not a lot of land, and yet it became one of the world's biggest economies. How did they do it? What was their secret? It was simple, really. They invested everything they could into their people, into education and health. Japan basically decided that its people would be its greatest resource, and it paid off, big time.
So what happens when this incredible resource is ignored or wasted? Well, you get unemployment. And unemployment is so much more than just a personal problem. It's a massive, tragic waste of human capital. It's like having a high-performance engine and just letting it sit in the garage to rust. It's a nation's most valuable asset, just sitting there doing nothing.
And this waste, it shows up in a few different ways. Out in rural areas, you might have seasonal unemployment, when there's no farm work for a few months. Or you get what's called disguised unemployment. That's a weird one. It's like having 8 people doing a job that really only needs 5. They're all working but not productively. And then in the cities, you get this really frustrating situation, educated unemployment. Young people with degrees who've done everything right and they still can't find a suitable job. Every single one of these is just wasted potential.
And the impact of all this, it's like a devastating domino effect. Unemployment puts more of a burden on the whole economy. It leads to a decline in people's health and their ability to get an education. And here's the really tragic part. It takes what should be a nation's greatest asset, its people, and turns it right back into what everyone feared in the first place, a liability.
But look, it doesn't have to be this way. I want to end on a really hopeful note. Let's finish with a story that shows just how unbelievably powerful one single smart investment in a person can be. This is the story of how an entire village was transformed from the ground up.
It all kicked off with just one investment. One family in the village sent their son to agriculture college. When he came back, he brought knowledge with him. He invented a better kind of plow, and just like that, crop yields went up for the whole village. For the first time, they had extra food to sell. That meant profit. And what do you think they did with that money? They built a school for all the children, and that school started producing more educated people. Then another family was able to train their daughter in tailoring, creating a whole new job. You see the chain reaction? One investment sparked this whole new ecosystem of jobs and prosperity.
So that one single investment in one person's education created this incredible ripple effect. As the level of human capital in the village rose, it completely transformed. It went from a place just trying to get by to a prosperous community, a place full of teachers, tailors, and now even agro-engineers.
And all of this brings us back to one final big question, one for you to think about. When you ask what really makes a country wealthy and strong, which type of capital do you think is the best? Is it land? Is it physical capital, like factories and machines? Or is it human capital, the skill, knowledge, and health of its people? After everything we've looked at today, I think the answer is clearer than ever.